What is the relationship of the many microcosms on the internet to reality? How do social movements and social circles within the internet affect reality? That is the topic of today, lords and ladies. And it's one you don't hear very often talked about, I think most of the time, because we just spend too much time in our microcosm. So we are the meat in the microcosm. Now, in a previous video, and this video is not about Trump or Clinton, I expressed doubts about the relationship of the internet following Trump to the ability to translate into votes, into actuality, reality, normie world. And things have changed in that regard, obviously, with the reinvestigation of Clinton or the reopening of the investigation, and that's all fair and well. That's not what this video is about. But I'm deeply skeptical of the at least short-term cultural impact, and by that I mean decade or so, of the internet in relation to reality. And as I said in the previous video, we don't really have a good gauge of this because the internet's only been around for 20 or 25 years. But we can make observations, of course. And what are some of these observations? Well, there are many microcosms in the internet, and many of us spend a lot of time on the internet, either for reasons of work, income, or pleasure, or any combination of the above. And many of us, whether you're MGTOW, pure MGTOW, alt-right, some combination of any of all these different things, or something completely different, but nonetheless something that doesn't stand in close relation to the normie world, we spend all this time on the internet in these microcosms, and we do our best, our very best, to avoid the world of the normies. Even people who have normal jobs, but ultimately prefer the microcosm that they themselves have selected for their specific interest or whatever. They go to their normie job, they do the work, they deal with the normies, but they don't really like them, and they don't want to spend very much time with them. And what happens is they do their job, and then they slink back to their pit of darkness, as it were, to avoid the burning light of the purifying rays of the normie sun. I mean, I spend almost no time with normies, and I think when I do, it becomes increasingly clear and difficult for me to do so, just because their world has no intersection with my world. But what does the internet do? It reinforces, one, beliefs, and two, certain types of behavior. So let's say I go to some social function or gathering, a birthday party or something along those lines. Well, I can tolerate it for an hour or two, a few hours maybe, but it falls within a context that is now quite alien to me. And the first thing in my mind when I get invited there is, when is it going to be over? And when I'm there, I'm thinking, when will this be over? When can I slink back to my pit of darkness? And it's not necessarily because I or other people are seeking agreeableness or a total sense of agreement with our worldview, although you can find that. But it's more that the alternative isn't very pretty. You're not going to, for example, this imaginary birthday party, you're not going to have the kinds of conversations that you find important and stimulating and necessary, because it'll all be small talk, it'll all be normie talk. And so the internet behavior, the microcosm, and the people who inhabit it reinforces itself, because the alternative isn't very pretty and isn't very pleasant. Whatever your MO is, whether you're alt-right or MGTOW or some capital T transhumanist or any combination of these things, or even something completely different, there's something about the normie world that isn't appealing to you. And as a consequence, you spend a lot of time on the internet doing your thing, and as little time as possible in the social world. Now, the more you do that, the more entrenched you become in your either ideology or worldview, etc. And even if you don't want to spend time in the repulsive world of the normies. And this all, of course, raises the question, well, if that's the case, if these activities lead to an entrenched worldview, how will this transfer over to reality? If the internet is indeed the center of modern culture, how will that transfer over to reality if the people on the internet spend most of the time on the internet, engage in discourse and discussion about the things that interest them on the internet and not in reality. I mean, it's not as if the normie world is open to that. It's why most people flee away from the normie world, because it simply doesn't have that appeal. And so what you end up with is a bit of a paradox. The internet is the fulcrum for modern social change within the context of the internet. Now, sometimes there's some overlap and there's some spillover. Obviously, a lot of the news people watch is fed to them via the internet these days, and that might transform a little bit the political landscape. And there has to be some relationship between the internet and the real world. And to promulgate ideas, you have to use the internet, even if you are primarily active in the real world. But the fundamental aspect there of retreating away from the normie world into your own little dark corner because it makes you feel more comfortable, you prefer it, or whatever, will always be there, I think. And it just reinforces behavior. Another consequence of it is it kind of takes away from your openness to ideas. You know, it's shocking, I suppose, or not so shocking, but if you spend all your time in alt-right circles and that's all you hear, then you're going to get a very rigid worldview. You'll get distorted interpretations of things like the regression to the mean. You'll get things like, so recently Vox Populi on Stefan Moyu, who admitted that RNK selection theory has been overhauled in the realm of biology, but still thinks it's some useful tool for describing politics. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't think it's that great, but you just hear this over and over and over again, and that becomes your worldview. Now, whether that's correct or not is kind of independent of the fact that ultimately that will lead to a shutting off of opportunity or shutting down of opportunity of you to hear other views. But then again, so does the normie world. The normie world has a very strict set of tenets and guidelines that you are expected to follow. Now, you can talk about anything within their guidelines. How your relationship is failing, how great the food was at the restaurant, this great film you saw at the cinema, some trip you took to, I don't know, Lithuania had some beautiful churches, whatever, anything that falls within that limited bit of things. You don't talk about politics, you don't talk about religion, you don't talk about sex, you don't talk about race. I mean, that's very clear. All the things that intrigue the people the most, who spend the most time in these various microcosms, as the meat in the microcosm, you don't talk about that stuff. So I'm just myself thinking we need some way to navigate some middle ground between these very specific microcosms. And I mean, I do think I try to shape and form my channel in such a way that I get a wide variety of viewpoints. I don't really agree with a lot of the strange things. I think there's strange things Babylonian Hebrew uses. I mean, you know, using ancient, for example, haplotypes to justify things as grounds for something. Well, I share an ancient paternal ancestor with Joseph Stalin, because paternally, my presumably ancestor on the Y haplotype came from someplace near the Caucasus or the area of Georgia, modern Georgia, maybe 18,000 years ago. Totally irrelevant to me, but I mean, and I just think, who cares? Well, his view is that some of this might justify activities going on in the Middle East and what have you. I don't agree with that, but it's good to get a different viewpoint, right, on different things. And it's good to be open-minded. Now, you might ask, well, you never have SJWs on your channel because it's clear they're not open-minded. They don't, I mean, their view is so warped and detached from reality that you can't really talk to these people at all. But neither here nor there. However, I do think that ultimately there needs to be some middle ground if these ideas are to get off the internet and into public discussion. In all my time attending a certain cafe, years and years where I live, I heard one political discussion about, I think it was last year, or maybe it was earlier this year, referring to the sort of refugee crisis or migrant crisis. That was it. Everything else is he said, she said, oh, my relationship is failing, and oh, ex-girlfriend, or the cinema's great, or work project Y is going well, and whatever. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but that's the kind of thing you see out there. And so long-term, disparate groups, whatever their ideas and ideologies might be, will need to get together and create a common platform, so we have in the real world, a amphitheater, if you will, where we can discuss these things rather than our own dark corners of the internet, because it's comfortable, and because the normie world doesn't permit this stuff. The normie world doesn't allow you to talk about things the alt-rights things are important. The normie world doesn't allow you to talk about things that are important to MGTOW-minded men. The normie world doesn't even allow you to talk about, it's not even that it doesn't allow you transhumanist stuff. I mean, it's just not interested in that. You want to talk about genetically modifying people. That just doesn't strike me as the kind of conversation that would fall in with, oh, my ex-boyfriend, I bumped into him, or some bullshit like that. I mean, that's right. So there needs to be some kind of counter to the stratification and isolation that occurs as a result of the meat in the microcosm, that allows the cultural fulcrum, which is the internet, to actually intersect, no pun intended, I'm not talking about intersectionality, but to intersect with the reality we live in. And I think that should be one of the most important goals of any group of people who have a certain set of ideas. And it's one that I support. I don't know how to go about it yet too well, but I think it's a major problem, and one that we need to address as we are the meat in the microcosm. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I will check you out later in all probability, assuming I don't drop dead of some cause that I am unaware of. So take care and enjoy the rest of your week, and may Zeus watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.